Sukkot, a vort for the Yom Tov. The following vort comes from the wisdom of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov of blessed memory. The verse states, he brought them into being in a desert region, in a desolate, howling wasteland. He encompassed them and granted them wisdom, protecting them like the pupil of his eye. Deuteronomy 32:10. That's from Parshas Hazinu, which is usually between Yom Kippur. Oftentimes it comes between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and this vort is for Sukkot. We have just completed the first major phase of the long and arduous repentance process, about to advance to the next phase of the process known as Sukkot, the festival of booths or huts. Sukkot commemorates the 7 clouds of glory that encompassed and protected the Jews during their 40 years in the desert after they left the Egyptian bondage. As our verse alludes to, these clouds of glory protected the Jews from the harsh elements of the desert as well as from attacks from their enemies. The temporary booths we construct on Sukkot contain the same spiritual power as the clouds of glory. The Talmud explains how clouds and the roof of the sukkah both originate from the ground. Clouds from the evaporation of moisture and from the earth's surface, and the sukkah roof from the plant life growing from the ground. Things which are derived from the same place contain the same spiritual elements, endowing them with the same spiritual powers. During the first phase of the repentance process on Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, most of the rituals that are observed are performed indoors in the synagogue. In contrast to this, the main service of the holiday of Sukkot is performed outdoors in the temporary shelter. The sukkah. On the holiday of Sukkot, we leave our homes and reside in these temporary shelters in order to complete the next phase of the repentance process, without which our repentance would not be complete or sustained. How does the often flimsy sukkah, whose roots consist of plant debris and other severed produce from the lowly ground, aid in our achieving the very lofty and holy level of full repentance and closeness to God? What does residing in the sukkah, which consists of material derived from lowly earth, accomplish that our intensive prayers in the synagogue were not able to achieve and complete? Why is it necessary for us to leave our homes and dwell in the booths to complete this repentance process? In the following paragraphs, we will seek some of the answers to these questions, as explained by Rabbi Nachman and his disciple Rav Nosson. Rabbi Nachman taught that every Jew, from the greatest tzaddik to the lowest sinner, is in a constant state of repentance or return to God. The repentance process involves returning to God either when one is on a spiritual high or when one falls or ebbs and is on a spiritual low. It is necessary to return and connect oneself to God when one has risen to a higher spiritual level, because success of any kind, including spiritual success, swells a person's ego and causes him or her to become comfortable with his achievement, making him lose his drive to work toward further spiritual advancement and closeness with God. So, since attaining a higher spiritual level can cause one to lose sight of God, when this occurs, one must get back on track and return or reconnect oneself with God despite the spiritual success. It is also necessary to return to God when one has fallen to a lower spiritual level. Such a fall is actually a necessary part of coming close to God, as will be explained later, and occurs to everyone, including great tzaddikim. A person may become discouraged as a result of a spiritual fall and erroneously think that God doesn't tolerate such mistakes and no longer desires him or his service. Therefore, in this case, one must strengthen himself to return to God, for this is what he desires. Even our holy King David, a spiritual expert, had to do repentance from both the lows and the highs. He wrote about it in the book of Psalms to instruct us on what is to be expected when one seeks God. King David, if I would ascend to heaven and I would lose God because of my spiritual high, you, God, are there because I return to you. After losing you due to my spiritual success, and if I were to make my bed in hell by falling from my level due to my mistakes, you are there. I can return to you no matter how low I've fallen, even if I've fallen to the depths of hell through my sins. Psalms 139:8. God causes everyone, even the greatest tzaddikim, to perpetually experience ups and downs throughout our lives in order to expose us to the broadest possible spiritual spectrum, maximizing our opportunities to discover God. Constant closeness with God is not sufficient in discovering everything about God. Distance is necessary as well, just as one must observe painting from close and from far to truly appreciate the artwork. Therefore, God constantly throws a person down from a position of closeness with Him in order to further educate and enlighten him or her. Therefore, when we fall, we should not become discouraged. It's all part of learning about God from a different perspective. God doesn't get upset with us about our fall as long as we are committed to continue seeking Him out. This is called returning or reconnecting oneself to God in a balanced way, allowing the seeker of God to experience and perceive God in every phase of his life and bringing him to understand God, both when one has earned closeness while on spiritual high and after having fallen in this way, the person comes to fully experience God's mercy. This is why Sukkot immediately follows Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and is an integral part of the spiritual cleansing process. During Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we spend the majority of our time in the holy environment of the synagogue in a serious and intensive prayer. This is synonymous with reconnecting oneself and returning to God in a spiritual high, as we described above. We will fulfill the commandment of Sukkah only outdoors. This is the place of where the forces of evil are found in abundance, which is synonymous with connecting oneself and returning to God when one has fallen to a lower level. The service of the days of awe of Sukkot are both necessary in cleansing ourselves and in returning to God. It spiritually injects into our souls the ability to remain connected to God no matter where on the spiritual spectrum we may be, whether on a spiritual high or at a spiritual low. The desert is where the forces of evil abound. The fact that the spiritually impure creatures such as snakes and scorpions live there attests to the impure nature of the desert, a place of the forces of evil. This was precisely where the holy Jewish nation was required to traverse for 40 years. By adhering to God's will, while in the realm of evil, they were able to destroy large numbers of evil forces and reclaim the holy sparks, invisible spiritual units of God's power that provide its possessor with life and power that had become trapped there. The desert represents the bottom of the spiritual spectrum, as described above. The Jews had to encounter the evil forces found in the desert before entering the Holy Land in order to connect the lowest spiritual spectrum to God. Upon entering the land of Israel, they would then connect the heights of the spiritual spectrum to God, when all ranges of the spiritual spectrum would thus be connected to God. It would allow His light to shine through the entire world and into every realm, allowing everyone to find God wherever they might be, from the spiritual heights of the holy places to the depths of the filthy places, the spiritual wastelands. Thus, every individual would be provided the spiritual powers needed to be able to find and connect to God no matter where they might happen to be. Looks like we'll have to do part 2 because this is a little bit long, so this is the end of part 1.